Yep. Hello, Todd.
Morning.
Good morning. Well, it's almost 10 o'clock. We'll wait just a couple more minutes just to see if everybody shows up, but I'll give the quick intro. I found Todd because he wrote an article, an editorial to the Tri-City paper about why we should not breach the dams. And I think it's really important as we try to learn as much as we can about issues to learn from experts, people that know more than we do. Mostly because you learn a lot more from people who know more than you. So I'm really thankful that Todd volunteered to take his time to come out and talk to us about the reasons why he thinks that we should not breach the dams. So he's going to talk about those reasons, and then if we have time, hopefully he can give us some suggestions for things that we can do to help the steelhead salmon population that don't have to do with dams. And then we'll take any questions that you guys have. Kind of like yesterday, if you have that raise hand button that's at the bottom, go ahead and click that if you have a question. But if you don't, I've got everybody on gallery view. You'll have to raise your hand. Make sure you look in the screen so that you can see your hand, because if you can't see it in the screen, I certainly won't be able to see it. And then I'll just unmute you when you have the question and then mute you back. That way we don't have as much static and people talking over each other and such. So it's 10 o'clock. Todd, you want to go ahead, introduce yourself a little bit, and then give us your expert opinions, please.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm in my home office. I'm not as comfy as some of you look, but I'm happy to join you. So I have worked on environmental issues for a long time, and I am currently a member of what's called the Puget Sound Salmon Recovery Council. So our job basically is to figure out how to help increase salmon populations so that there's more salmon, so that people can catch more salmon, so that killer whales can eat salmon. So that's what I do a lot of my time these days. And I know Moscow really well. My wife grew up in Clarkston, so I love that part of the state. So I'm really happy to talk to you about that. So I am going to try, can I share my screen here?
Sure.
Let me see. It says you have disabled screen sharing. So I want to show you pictures.
Okay. Let's see if I can find.
So while you're doing that, just a check, how many of you, just raise your hands, know where the Snake River dams are? You know where they are? They're not that far away from you. In fact, the Lower Granite Dam is just about an hour away. So let's see, is that the right one? Yeah, okay, good. I just did a visit there in January to go see it. And so when everybody is released and we can all go outside again, you should see if you can go to visit the Lower Granite Dam. It's really cool. But this is Chinook salmon. This is what we're worried about. Steelhead also is another, it's a trout, but it also goes out to the ocean. So that's another thing that we're trying to save. So the concern is that the dams hurt the fish. And I want to talk about that. But first I want to talk about the dam. So this is the Lower Granite Dam. This is the one that's not too far away from you guys. And you can see a couple of things. One, yep, you can see the long part that comes out, this part right here. Oops, got to go back. This part right here, that is for barges so that wheat growers and other folks can ship the grain down the river. And so they go into that, the water is reduced, the water is lowered, and then they sail down the river. And then the other part is where you can see where all the water is coming through. So some water goes through the dam like that, and some water goes into this area right over here, which generates electricity. So those are the two big reasons that we have the dams on the Snake River, is to ship farm products like wheat and other things down to Portland, where they can be shipped all over the world, and to generate electricity for us. So here is where the dams are. These are the 4 lower Snake River dams, and the arrow is where you are in Moscow. So like I said, not too far away. And so then there's 4, and so the Ice Harbor Dam, which is the farthest downstream, is right where the Tri-Cities are. So those are, when people talk about tearing down the dams, those are the 4 dams that they're talking about. So as I said, this is a barge, and you can tell this is going through just past Lewiston, I think, and that's one of the big things. So about half of the wheat in eastern Washington and then some in Idaho, yes, it's a smiley face, it's good, go down on these barges. If we didn't have the Snake River dams, all of that wheat and all those other products would have to get put onto trains or trucks. Right now, trains are very full, so there's not a lot of extra trains that you can put it on, and it would take a huge number of trucks to replace even just one barge. Something like 20 trucks is what you would have to do for every single barge, which is a ton. And they'd be on the roads, and then they'd be using gasoline, and so they'd be having other environmental impacts. So if you tear down the dams, you lose the ability to ship a lot of the products, and you make it also more expensive. So this is kind of confusing, but I'll tell you what this is. The other thing that the Snake River dams do is that they produce electricity. This is the most important thing that the dams do. And what you can see is the blue, you can see the blue line at the top. And people at the blue line at the top is the amount of electricity. This is from December, right before Christmas. How much electricity is from the dams. And down way at the bottom, you can see that little green line. That's how much electricity is produced by wind turbines. So when the lights in your house and video games and everything else you use electricity for, the electricity where you live comes from hydropower. And when there are long periods of time when we don't have any wind, that it makes up the whole, it makes up basically everything, all the electricity that we have. So that's why it's important to have the hydro dams creating electricity. So if we took them away, what would happen? We'd have to replace that electricity with something else. And in some cases, I think Ella has a question. We'll get to it in a second, Ella. In some cases, you can replace some of the electricity with wind turbines, with the giant big windmills. But a lot of times you can't, because the wind doesn't always blow when you want it to. So you have to have something that you can turn on and off. And natural gas, and this is a natural gas plant, is something you can turn on and off. So the problem with that is that if you're worried about climate change and air pollution, going from dams to natural gas increases the amount of air pollution. So what we have right now with dams is that they don't produce any air pollution. The water goes through, it creates electricity, and there's no carbon dioxide, there's no air pollution. But with natural gas, you get all of those things. Now, natural gas is good in a lot of ways, right? We want electricity. We want to be able to turn on our lights and know that the electricity is going to be there. But if you are tearing down dams and going to natural gas, you're going to get more pollution. So the question that we have, though, the things that people are concerned about, including me, because I care about salmon, and everybody, I think probably many of you have gone fishing with your parents, is we want more fish. And what we need to do is to make sure that the fish can get past the dams and don't die. So where the fish die is when they're going downstream. Let me go back to the picture of the dam. So when they go and they're up here in the upstream, and then they go through this area where the water is going, then sometimes the concern is that some of them will die. So yes, we want to save the fish. That's exactly right. So the question is, how can we make sure that the fish can get past these dams without being killed? So in the Tri-Cities, there is what's called the Pacific Northwest National Lab. And what the lab does is that they do a lot of science, experiments on the dams and other things to make sure that the fish can get through. And this is really cool. These little things with the smiley faces, they are scientific fish. So they're little sensors, and what they do is they put them at the top of the dam, and then they go through the dam, and the sensors can see how much pressure there is and whether they will hurt the fish. And so they just did this last week, and they found that the new turbines, which are in the dam, do much less harm to the fish. So the way it generates electricity is the water goes through. There's what's called a turbine, and it spins it around really fast. The water pressure spins it around really fast, and that generates the electricity. But what you don't want is you don't want a fish going through that and spinning around real fast, because the fish don't like it, and sometimes it kills them. So they created a new turbine to make it so that it doesn't hurt the fish as much. And they tested it using these little sensors. And what they found is that these new turbines do a much better job of protecting the fish. So if you're concerned about fish, what we can do is have these new turbines in the dams, which they do in some already, and fewer fish get hurt, but we still get the electricity. So it's great. So one of the things that people are concerned about is the number of salmon, how many fish are being killed, and how many fish, and it's not just salmon, it's steelhead also, are in the Snake River. And the line that I have there is in the year 2000. And what you could see is that before the year 2000, there were not many fish in the Snake River. They were a very low population. But since 2000, we have made changes in the way that the dams work. And what you can see is that the population went way up. And then all sorts of things affect the salmon and how many come back each year. One big thing is ocean. So they go out into the Pacific Ocean where they live for several years, and then they come back. And if the ocean conditions are bad, if it's too hot, or if they get eaten by orca or other things like that, then not many of them come back. So what you can see is it went way up, and then it went down, and now it's gone up, and now it's gone down again. So the good news is, though, that even though it's gone up and down, it's still much higher than it was in the 1980s and 1990s. And so we're saving the fish. The populations are going up. We want them to go up even more, right? This level is good. We want it to be even higher, which is why the science that they're doing is so important. But I want to tell you the good news is that we're on the right track, which is that the population of the number of salmon and steelhead in the Snake River is going in the right direction. Now, I live near Seattle, and so I focus on salmon and steelhead in western part of the state. And what I can tell you is, unfortunately, we aren't seeing the same sort of thing in Puget Sound and in Western Washington. The salmon populations, rather than going up, are actually starting to go down a bit. So my concern is when I look around and I say, where are salmon doing well and where are they dying? They're dying in Western Washington. On the Snake River, there is still concern and we want to do better, but they're actually doing okay. So if I was going to say, where should we focus our efforts to make sure that salmon come back, I would say do it in Western Washington and Seattle and the Puget Sound, not on the Snake River. And we should just keep doing what we're doing on the Snake River, which is moving in the right direction. So here are orca. One of the other reasons that we want more fish is because orca eat them. And so the orca in Puget Sound are endangered, and their population is going downwards. And the number one thing that they eat is Chinook salmon. And the reason that orca killer whales are dying in Puget Sound is that there's not enough Chinook to eat. And so they're starving. So we need to get a lot more fish to the orca whales, to the killer whales in Puget Sound to help them. Some people say that the way to do that is to tear down the dams and get more fish to them. But what the scientists at what's called the Department of Fish and Wildlife in Washington State, and then a national organization or national agency called NOAA Fisheries, what they do is they study the orca and they study the salmon to say where is important, where do we need salmon to help the orca. And the number one place that we need salmon is in Western Washington and Puget Sound, and up in Canada in a river called the Fraser River. The Snake River is way down the list. It's number 9. So some of the salmon that they eat, that the orca eat, come from the Snake River, but Puget Sound is really important. And so if we want to help the killer whales, the first place we should start helping the salmon is in Puget Sound, because that's where they get most of their food. And that also, the Puget Sound is also the place that we are doing the worst job of helping them, where the number of salmon for them to eat is going down. So I spend my time working on salmon, and I look around the state and I say, where should we put our money? Where should we put our effort to help salmon? And I think that tearing down the Snake River dams would be a bad idea. One, it takes a lot of money, and I would rather take the money from the Snake River dams and put it in Puget Sound to help the salmon there, right where the killer whales are. Second, if we tear down the dams, farmers in Moscow and Lewiston and Pullman won't be able to, it'll have a harder time shipping their grain and other things around the world and making money. And I imagine that some of your parents are either farmers or deal with farmers. That's a big concern right now. And lastly, if we tear down the dams, we would lose that electricity, that carbon-free electricity. If you're concerned about climate change, if you're concerned about air pollution, that's a really bad decision to go from carbon-free electricity to natural gas. It increases the amount of air pollution and it increases the risk of climate change. I understand that people care a lot about salmon. They want to fish. I have been all over the area where you live in the Snake River. I love that area, and I want there to be lots and lots of fish. And the good news is that, population of salmon and steelhead are going up. Like I said, we need to do more. But if we care about increasing salmon across the whole region and helping the orca, let's do it in Puget Sound. Let's spend our time and money there rather than do something like tearing down the Snake River dams, which would hurt the economy and really wouldn't help the salmon. So I'll stop there because I'm sure you have questions.
Okay, so if you have a question, go ahead. I've got a couple people already doing the raising hands. So let's start with Jake.
Yeah. I was wondering, when you do have the dams, isn't it like 5% electricity?
So I think what you're asking is how much electricity do we get from the dams? And the answer is that we get about 5% of our electricity for Washington, Oregon, and Idaho from the dams. So you're right. So what would it take to replace that if we tore down those dams? That amount of electricity is more than every wind turbine and all solar in Washington state. So if we tore down, it would be like tearing down every wind turbine and removing every solar panel in Washington state. So it sounds like a small amount, but actually it's a really pretty big amount. The other thing is that we are facing an electricity shortage. The amount of electricity we use is going up. So if we tore down the dams, we would not only have to build more generation, more electricity plants to make up for the growth that we're going to have, but also for that loss. So it would be a big stress, but you're exactly right. It's 5%.
Okay. Ella, go ahead.
If we go to natural gas for energy, will it kill the environment and kill more fish, or will it help them?
So if we go to natural gas, it creates pollution, but it's a different type of pollution. It's not water pollution, it's air pollution. So, and it's also, and that's two types of air pollution. One is like smog, which you don't have in Moscow very good, but they have a lot of in Los Angeles. But it also creates carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is what impacts climate change. So it's a different type of pollution. So if you're going to create more pollution that way, you want to make sure that you're helping, that you're getting something for it, which is more salmon. And like I said, with the research that they've done, where they test the turbines with the little sensors, they find that the amount of salmon population that you would increase is pretty small. So you get a big increase in air pollution for only a very small improvement in salmon.
Katie.
So what was the little tube thing that was in front of where the barges were?
The tube thing, I have to look at my picture. Hang on a second, I can't remember.
Because there was a little tube in front.
I don't know. Yeah, I can't, it's the way the barge is. I can see if I can, no, somebody else is sharing and drawing.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, guys, don't do that.
Hang on, here's the picture. Can you see that? All right, there, can you see that?
Yep.
It was the first picture where there was a little tube in the front of the dam.
Oh yeah, so that,
The little
yeah. So that is where, so that long area there is where the barge goes in here, and then the water goes down, and then it comes out here. And this little thing is what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
So that prevents this rough water from interfering with the barge, which comes out here. So it just protects the barge from being out in this rough water.
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
Okay. And let's see, I'll do that. Alex.
So how many percent of the salmon actually get killed at every Snake River Dam that coming upstream back to spawn?
So this is a really great question. So most of the salmon that die from the dams get killed when they're going downstream, when they're little tiny fish. And at the Lower Granite Dam, which is the one near you, they say about 2% of the fish. So 98% of the fish get through successfully. And they do a couple of things. One, that water that you saw spilling, the fish go through there, and they like that better than going through the turbines. And so most of them go that way. And then there's another way that they can go down, that's on the side of the dam that's a little more gentle to them. And then what they do is they'll collect salmon, little tiny, what are called fry, and pick them up, and then they put them in a barge, and then they take them downstream. So they carry them downstream by themselves. So that's all the ways that they try to make sure that the fish live going downstream. But about 2% die. Coming upstream, the fish actually do pretty well. Salmon are, they have to go over some pretty tough natural barriers anyway. And each of the dams has a fish ladder that they can go up. So it's really going downstream that's the big problem. Upstream, it's a lot easier for them.
Guinevere.
So pretty much the same thing as Katie, but like I noticed something that was on the first picture, and I wonder what it is.
Okay. Do we want to show the picture again?
Mhm.
All right, let me show the picture. All
Like
right,
the back, like it's kind of like a bridge in the back.
like this part or this part?
Right. I don't know if I can like use my mouse, but yeah, right there, like right where your mouse is, right there.
Yes, okay. So that's where the barges come from here, and then they come down, and then they come in there, and then they can tie up there and wait while the dam gets ready to take them in. So they just tie up there, and then they go into here, and then the water goes down, and then they come out here.
Okay.
So yeah, you can see this. That's a really important part of these dams, is helping farmers get barges downstream. So a lot of these dams, the dams were built when they were originally designed. That was the number one reason that they were built, was to help barges move downstream.
Okay, Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, I have two questions. One is that if wouldn't it be less of a hassle if you guys just use trains to use going down, because it's not a barge and it's not more money for the huge the huge part where the barge goes in, because that's more money in. And then there's still train tracks, so what's bad with the trains? I know they still do the coal thing, but I feel like it would be less of a hassle.
That's a good question. So some people think it is, and they say that we could replace the barges with trains. But barges are really cheap way to go down, because the river just carries, they have a tug which either pushes or pulls the barge, but because the river goes down, it's really cheap. Basically just the river carries them down. And so it's a lot less expensive than trains. Also, barges are really big, and you have to replace one barge, you have to have a lot of trains. And right now, the trains are carrying lots of other stuff. So we don't actually have enough trains to replace it. It's like in the same way that there's a traffic jam on the road, there's a traffic jam on the trains right now. So, but you're right, this is a big question about what is the cheapest route, and barges are really cheap.
Yeah. My second one is that if someone, the fish ladders, they might work, but not really, because the water is going downstream when they're trying to go upstream, and there's very little water going down the fish ladder, so then it doesn't drain it. Because if there's too much water, there'd be swept off the side, but it's very little water to get through and up a huge 500 something feet up. So that's a really hard part.
Salmon are pretty amazing. You're right that you don't want to have either too much water or too little water going through it. And that's why I say you should go to the Lower Granite Dam and look at it, because these guys are pretty smart. The scientists who built these and designed them have come up with clever ways to help the salmon go up the fish ladder. salmon are really tough, and they have to overcome a lot of things that are worse than the dams. It's pretty amazing how they swim thousands of miles successfully. You wouldn't think of that, right? I mean, it's just this little fish, but they can go thousands of miles. So it's really amazing. But you're right. You want to make sure that you get it so that the water is not too high or too low. And one of the concerns about the water being too low is that the water gets too hot. Salmon like cold water. And if you don't have enough water, it gets too hot. So they make sure that they keep enough water going through there so that it's nice and cold like they like it.
Okay, and we got time for 2 more. We'll do Isaac and then Ryan. Go ahead, Isaac.
So wouldn't it be easier if they just took out the dams and had ships just go right down the river?
That is a great question. And the problem is that because there are lots of rough areas where there's rapids and other things like that, the ships couldn't make it. So the reason they had to build the dams is to make it so that the ships could go down. If you removed the dams, the barges wouldn't be able to make it anymore. So if there was a way so that they could get down without the dams, I'm sure they would look at it, but unfortunately, that's just not possible right now. But it was a good idea. Be cool if they could.
And Ryan, go ahead, ask yours.
Forgot.
Okay, does anybody else have one last question then? Okay, all right, Jake, we'll give you the last one. Here you go.
Yes. I was thinking that if you did take out the dams fully, the smart thing to do to take them out, one is to take the pieces out one by one.
Mm-hmm.
But if you took some pieces of dam out, that would work. But if you took the whole thing out just in one big swoop, there would probably be a huge chunk of water that was being held up from the dam. So the thing that would be smart to do, no offense, but to take part of the dam out, because you're still getting electricity and you're still getting that 5%, but then you could also put like wind turbines in, because it's not it's not killing any salmon, even that it's a really little piece of salmon that are dying. But there's you could make a lot of wind turbines and they're really cheap and they make a lot of electricity. So yeah.
So Jake, is your question, would it be better if you were going to breach dams, would it be better to partially breach them or fully breach them from Todd's perspective? Is that your question? Is that your
yeah.
Okay, cool.
There's 2 things about that. So you hit on a couple of cool things. The first thing is that you said that if you take out the dams, there'll be a big rush of water, and then what happens is there's a lot of dirt underneath the dams that builds up. And so if you take out the dams, that water, but more importantly, that dirt flows downstream. And that actually is one reason that if you tear down the dams, it won't help salmon or steelhead for a long time, because it takes years for all of that dirt to flow downstream. And salmon don't like all that dirt. It gets real cloudy, the water gets real cloudy, and they don't like that. So even if you tore down the dams, all of that dirt would go downstream, and it would take 5 or 10 years before the conditions would get better to where salmon would like it. So you're exactly right. If you tear them down, it's just not the water that happens immediately after you tear it down. It takes years for it to get back to normal. But the other thing you said is that could we tear down part of the dam and keep it generating electricity on the other part of the dam? And unfortunately, that doesn't work out. That would be cool if it did, but what would happen is that the water would go around in the new area and wouldn't go into the turbines. So they have looked at trying to figure out how to do both of those things. And what they found is better is to do what that little sensor I showed you about the fish going through the turbines, is to make it safe for them to go through the turbines rather than tear down the dam. It'd be nice if they could do that, but they've looked at it and they found that it's better and safer for salmon if they make the turbine safer rather than tear down part of the dam.
All right. Well, guys, we heard from two experts. If you have any questions that you want to ask either one of them, make sure you send me an email or something, and then I can email them and they'll answer it for us. Can everybody wave a thank you to Todd? Because we really appreciate you taking your time to help us out learning.
Those good questions.
Yeah, and thank you very much. Let's see, Guinevere, I'm going to meet with you, and then I've got a meeting set up with Jake and Braden and Ella and Anea. And then River, can you meet at noon through Zoom today? Okay, cool. Then I'll meet with you and Gabe and hopefully Ryan too. Ella's raising her hand. I knew that would happen. Okay, Ella, one last one. What do you got?
No, it's for what time will the meeting for Braden, Jake, and me?
11 o'clock. And I'll post something in Google Classroom.
11 o'clock. Okay, cool.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Todd. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to end the meeting. Have a great day, guys. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.